We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 7th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Chiji.
Good morning, Yoon.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, let's start with the news feed. Every day, we make a news feed that looks at which hashtags and news items have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. The first hashtag is 52 hours. South Korea has decided to reform the controversial work hour policy so that there's a little more wiggle room. Back in 2018, the previous government restricted employers from overworking their staff. The maximum overtime allowed for one person was 12 hours per week, so total work hours could not go over 52. But the current government has now decided to allow companies to manage overtime more flexibly. Instead of limiting overwork on a weekly basis, the revision allows managing work hours on a monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis. This way, more overtime can be done on specific weeks with heavier workloads. Under the revised system, the maximum work hours per week has been expanded to 69 hours. The second hashtag is poisoning. Many parents in Iran have gathered outside the Education Ministry building in western Tehran to protest against suspected poison attacks on their daughters. Since November, hundreds of schoolgirls have reported unexplained illnesses, and officials have suspected that to be caused by poison attacks from hardline Islamist groups opposed to girls' education. The third hashtag is Fubao. She's the first panda to be born in South Korea. She was born in July 2020 at Everland theme park and has since grown healthily there. Fubao made Chinese headlines after a local media outlet interviewed her zookeeper, who talked about how she's been doing. As soon as the interview aired, many Chinese netizens looked up Fubao's videos and left comments. Some even said they were excited to soon see Fubao in person. Like most giant pandas around the world, Fubao is on loan from China. As part of China's breeding program that aims to expand the gene pool, pandas living in other countries must be sent back before they turn 4 years old. Now let's look a bit deeper into the first hashtag, 52 hours. Now the whole reason why a revision was made was because businesses have complained that it was hard to meet deadlines or work efficiently. This revision guarantees 11 hours of rest between each workday. It also aims to provide longer paid time off for workers. If this revision takes effect, workers can save overtime work hours as paid leave days, then use them all at once for a long holiday. Labor Minister Lee Jung-sik said the new plan aims to benefit workers and provide a better work-life balance. The public will have 40 days to submit their opinions before the measure is sent to the National Assembly for approval between in June or July. Now let's hear what our panelists speaking on behalf of the younger generation have to say on this. Ki-hoon, what do you think about this proposed revision?
Well, from the business point of view, the extension of maximum weekly working hours could be quite beneficial to improve the overall productivity, especially during busier times. Now, as a worker's point of view, I think it really depends what type of worker you are.
Right.
For example, if you plan on a long vacation overseas and you don't mind working like a robot, this could be quite ideal working condition. Whereas if you value your work-life balance a little more on a daily basis, this might not be as appealing to you. And for me, I thought about 69 hours a week. I would probably be burnt out way before I go on any kind of vacation. So I think it really depends on what type of worker you are.
And I hope that you wouldn't be overworking every week.
Right.
Now, another popular work hour system many millennials and Gen Z have been talking about was working only 4 days a week. Now, Ji-hee, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. So, well, recently, 4-Day Week Global, which is a nonprofit organization, concluded its 6-month trial showing that employees experienced less stress, slept better, and juggled work and home responsibilities with greater ease because of the 4-day work week. And businesses benefited as well, because the number of sick days was reduced by a third, and attrition at the workplace was also reduced by almost 60%. And almost every company's productivity either was maintained or improved. And I've always always been for ditching this conventional working week as well.
Right, you're a freelancer.
I am. And I became a freelancer because I wanted to have more control over my working hours. I'm really satisfied with that. And I actually heard from a friend who goes to a Korean company, which became a pioneer in introducing this 4-day work week. And he told me that he's very satisfied with his 4-day work week because he has 3 resting days. And for your information, he rests on Fridays.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Because based on the 4-day weekday, another pickle is, are you going to rest on Friday or Wednesday?
Right.
So that is definitely a topic a lot of the younger generation are talking about here in Korea. And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. And let's head into our main discussion for today. Take a look at the screen to find out what we'll discuss.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
Psy told the world back in 2012 that he's Gangnam Style. But what exactly is that? Koreans could tell you right away. Gangnam is the epicenter of Seoul with basically everything, from good schools and jobs to vibrant nightlife, public transport, and premium luxury brands. If you live in this district in Seoul, many assume that you're from a wealthy household or you're financially well off. Seoul City released a report last June that showed of all the affluent households in Seoul with a monthly income of more than $6,400, roughly 33% lived in Gangnam. So it's no question that Gangnam is one of the places that people most aspire to live in. But reality is, it's hard for the average Korean to afford to buy a home anywhere in the capital Seoul. Last year, Korea Economic Research Institute found out that the average wage worker in Korea would have to save up 21 years' worth of their full annual salary to buy a place in Seoul. It got worse for younger workers. One study found that it would take at least 100 years of saving all of their paycheck for a wage worker in his or her 20s to find a house in Seoul. Other houses outside of the capital with less accessibility to jobs and entertainment facilities aren't that cheap either. Which brings us to today's topic. Today, NewsGen looks at 3 questions. 1. Why have Millennials and Gen Z in Korea lost hope over the housing market? Do they even find a need to buy their own house? 2. What are some other ways the younger generation live without buying a home in Korea? 3. The government has been trying to stabilize housing prices by introducing different policies. Are they meeting the demands and reality of the younger generation?
Buying your own house. It seems like an impossible dream, especially in Seoul, where many of the younger generation want to live. And Jihi, we briefly saw in the introductory video how difficult it is to get onto the housing ladder in Korea, especially for those in their 20s and 30s. So explain to us a bit more about how it became this way.
Well, house ownership in people younger than 40 is a lot lower than those than the older generation, and the housing market really seems to be in the worst shape ever. And there are plenty of reasons why the housing market became so unfavorable to especially the younger generation in Korea. But first, with historically high inflation, this has been raising the monthly rents as well, adding to the burden of the 20s and 30s because they usually don't have stable homes yet and live off by paying rent. And second, housing prices soared after the outbreak of COVID-19. And as we know, there was also a historically low interest rate, which was near zero because the government was easing its monetary policy. So many people in their 20s and 30s, they really pulled off everything, or 영끌, we say it, even really giving your all, even your soul to buy a house, yes, getting maximum loans as well. But then the interest rates started to rise again after the subsiding of this pandemic, and they're really struggling from paying all these interest rates from their loans as well. I mean, dating is hard enough. Not many people are getting married.
Dating is very hard.
It is.
Very, very hard.
It is.
Not
and housing really is a big reason why people aren't getting married. And it really is like asking for the moon to get a house here.
Exactly. So do you think in these types of difficult situations, we actually still need to buy a house? Do you think it's worth not spending a dime and just leaving everything up for your house?
Well, I'm personally for buying a house,
Really?
right? Because in Korea in particular, buying an apartment isn't just for living purposes, but it's a great means of investment as well. I mean, real estate is one of the few properties in which the price steadily rises over time. So to achieve housing stability, as well as to engage in an investment you can be sure of, I think saving up to buy a house could be a good way of doing so.
It's actually been considered a very stable investment,
It
given that
is.
we're in such an unstable reality
That's
and
right.
future. What about you, Kyun? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm a little against buying a house for many different reasons. Firstly, it's become close to impossible to fully own your own house due to the extremely high cost of apartments, especially here in Seoul and the metropolitan area. Second, even if you do get a mortgage loan, you would have to probably end up working the rest of your career paying back the loan.
Right.
With interest on top of that. So, I mean, it'll feel like you're a slave to debt, and nobody wants to be in debt, right? That being said, I mean, if you're willing to pay back the loan for the rest of your life to eventually own a home, by all means, go for it. But if you value spending money on other things, maybe you can put off, buying a house to some time later.
I think it comes down to how much you value the present versus the future.
Exactly.
Right, but I can also relate to the comment you mentioned about how we would have so much debt, we'd be like a slave to debt, right?
I feel like a slave right now. Not a good feeling.
Exactly. So it's close to impossible to buy a house at our age, but why do you think this is so?
Well, if you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, maybe this may not be the case, but that's only the minority. And since we're the majority, it's close to impossible due to the lack of affordability of the houses in Seoul. And many youngsters come to Seoul to live here to seek more opportunities and to ultimately land the dream job for a better future. But in turn, this has created fierce competition and increase in population density, which is one of the causes of rising prices, right? So it's quite ironic to see this kind of phenomenon where people come to live to seek a better life with a better financial status, but in turn end up struggling to make ends meet. And they become kind of stuck living in Seoul because going back to rural areas where they came from, it lacks infrastructure, education, and of course job opportunities.
Exactly.
So it's a sad truth.
Right. And what are your thoughts on this, Chi-hee?
Well, actually, we have statistics depicting how difficult or near impossible it is to buy a home here in the country. So let's take a look at the screen for a moment. This is a graph showing the years it takes to buy a home in the country, and that's if saving 100% of your salary. And the average monthly pay here in Korea is $2,700.
Right.
So if you save 100% of that, you will be able to buy a house.
Is that even possible?
Is that even possible?
100%.
Is that even realistic, really? I mean, the study was conducted by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. And to buy a home in the metropolitan area, it's not just Seoul, but metropolitan area, it takes over 10 years.
Wow.
But also, according to the Korea Economic Research Institute, to buy an apartment specifically in Seoul, one has to save up 100% of their salary for almost 22 years.
Excuse me?
Yes,
How many
22
years?
2 decades, because housing prices in Seoul tend to be astronomically higher than other regions nationwide. And it's not like you can get your dream house within this period as well.
I don't know what shocks me more, if you have to save up 100% or the 22 years part.
I think this is ridiculous.
It is.
It doesn't make sense in reality. So let's say if I save up 50% of my salary, that means I have to wait 44 years and I'll be 60, 70. What's the point of having a house when you're 60 or 70? You're living by yourself.
You can choose to live somewhere else, not Seoul.
Busan. Let's go Busan, everyone.
Going for Busan. So, Kyun, it seems like you're tilted towards not buying a house, right?
Not buying, it's about can't buying. I cannot buy one.
That's a very
Even if I wanted
relatable.
to.
Exactly. But apart from living with your parents, what are some other ways you can find a roof over your head then?
Okay, let me calm down
Yeah,
first.
calm down
I'm very calm. Anyway, there's a real estate term commonly used in Korea called GenZ. So it's a contract signed between the property owner and the tenant, where the tenant would pay a lump sum deposit in advance and get it fully refunded once the lease period ends. So this is a great way to reduce the burden of paying monthly rent, only if you have a large sum of money saved up beforehand.
Right.
So it's
Okay.
only if you have a lot of money saved up.
Exactly. And there's another one where the government is setting like new policies, like youth housing support policy to provide more affordable housing options for young people in Korea. I mean, this could help achieve the goal of independent living, which in turn can contribute more to the growth of the economy in the long run.
All right. And why don't we use this time now to expand our talks to find out how it's like abroad? We'll soon include a housing market expert in our discussion. We're now going to be speaking with a real estate salesperson in Canada. It's Angie Koo. Great to have you here with us, Angie.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now, Angie, I must assume you've heard our discussion till now, and it's very difficult for people in their 20s and 30s to buy their own property here in Korea. So I'm wondering how it's like in Canada.
I can say buying a home in Toronto is definitely difficult and expensive to own as much as owning an apartment in Seoul. I recently saw an article from local newspaper that nearly 3 in 4 millionaires living in Toronto say owning a home is very important to them. However, less than a quarter believe that they will ever be able to afford a place of their own in the city. So based on this article and from my experiences, definitely majority of people in Toronto have difficulty purchasing a home without any help from their parents. I would say half of my clients were able to purchase their first home with minimum 20% down payment that their parents have helped them. And half of my clients still live in rents and still saving money to purchase their first home in the future.
I see. So the situation seems to be quite similar here to Korea. And Chihi, do you have any questions for Angie?
Right. So why is this the case, Angie? And how's the housing market different from Korea?
I would say first reason is due to shortage of housing supply in Toronto, and this makes housing market skyrocket the price because Toronto is one of the largest multicultural cities in the world, and almost half of the population is immigrants. And the government is planning to take high level of immigrants each year, and this led high competition in the housing market. And the second reason is due to difficulty in getting a mortgage. I believe the lack of affordability in Toronto is steeper than other areas in Canada. And the recent stats showed 25 to 34 years old annual income in Toronto ranked slightly above $50,000 Canadian dollars in 2020. Meanwhile, the average home prices in the region have soared to 1.1 million.
Wow.
Yes.
Angie, last question. Do you think our generation, like people in our 20s and 30s, need to buy a house? And what are the pros and cons of this type of investment?
I know majority young generation struggle to buy a home in the big cities around the world. But I would definitely suggest young generations to invest in real estate at earliest time that they can. I always say to my clients, now is the best time to invest because eventually the price will increase every year. And like I said earlier, for the case of Toronto, the Canadian government plans to take 500,000 immigrants to Canada each year by 2025. And this will have a greater impact on the existing shortage of housing supply and will result of both high rent prices and, of course, price increases in housing markets too. So with how much millennials make a year on average, rent takes about 40% or even higher of their income. So I highly suggest young generation to buy home and take their rent payments to mortgage payments and pay off the principal. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Angie.
Yeah.
Due to time, we have to
Thank
stop
you.
here, but thank you so much. It was
okay.
such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Now, Angie made a lot of interesting comments. What I was surprised about was that this housing market fiasco isn't only limited to Korea,
No.
Right.
but it's actually there in Toronto, Canada as well.
Right.
What about you, Jihi?
Yes, it's totally universal. It's surprising to hear that many young people believe that it's important or valuable to buy a house, but it's really difficult unless you have help from your parents, which is the same here for us.
Definitely, and I think it's now time to include our viewers into our discussion. As a daily morning program in an international broadcast channel, we try to find out what millennials and Gen Z around the world think about our discussion topic of the day. So we asked them if they thought purchasing a house is necessary or could be a good investment. Here's what they said. Tasmia Tazin said, of course it's necessary. No one can tell you to leave your own home. Siska Andriani said it's necessary, and I also want to buy one, but the house prices keep increasing here in Indonesia. For me personally, it's been hard to buy one so far. Hussein Demir said, personally, I don't plan on buying since I've never lived anywhere long enough to feel attached, and I don't want to deal with the expenses if I'm not living in it. Now, based on all of our viewers' comments, Jihi, what do you think?
Well, I want to make a comment on what Tasmia Tazin said. No one can tell you to leave your own home,
Right.
which is why everyone wants to buy a house, at least want to live in a GenZ, as Ki-hoon explained, instead of monthly rental house.
All right, and Ki-hoon?
I'm on the same page as Hussein. You know, buying a house means planning to live there for a long time, so you build that kind of attachment. And if you are not planning to own a house, I guess paying that money would not be the wise way of spending your hard-earned money. So
Right.
on other things.
And now every day we do upload questions related to our discussion topic for our viewers to answer. If you want to participate, please search ArirangNews on YouTube. Look into our community tab. The link is right below. Now, let's wrap up our discussion for today. The government has been trying to stabilize the housing market for some time now, but are there any policies that you guys would like to see specifically that could help our generation, starting with Jihi?
Well, food, clothing, and shelter really form the requisites of our life.
Definitely.
But the latter aspect or component is just so difficult to satisfy all of us. And it's always a very complicated issue. I mean, I could sound too ideal this could sound out of reach, but I honestly wish there could be more apartments just for the younger generation, young people under 40, and a lot cheaper than the average apartment prices.
Right.
And I also wish more housing loans with fixed interest rates, low interest rates.
I love your emphasis on fixed.
Yes, could be available for the younger generation as well.
All right, and Ki-hoon?
Yeah, so just like what Chi said, government should, foster more affordable houses for more youngsters to get married, have families, because, the population will definitely determine the outlook of a country. So please help us.
All right. And today we talked about what the new generation think about the housing market, whether we need to buy our own house or not, or whether we can. And we even got to hear what it's like outside of Korea. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.